Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest. Today, I'm joined by Lalitaa Suglani, who is an award-winning psychologist, leadership empowerment expert, international speaker, and author of the book, High Functioning Anxiety. And we'll ask her more about that shortly. She's often featured in the New York Post, Harper's Bazaar, the Daily Mail, and international publications. Lalitaa believes that the key to achieving true and lasting success and happiness in all aspects of life lies within our own minds. She's witnessed how personal growth and self-awareness can enable us to control our thought patterns, manage our internal voice, develop a positive mindset, and build the life and career we desire. Lalitaa's mission is to facilitate transformation in people's lives by promoting understanding and acceptance of emotions, attachments, and relationships. And her aim is to awaken individuals to their inner strengths, empower them to thrive and prosper in life. Lalitaa, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell us, your book is called High Functioning Anxiety. What is high functioning anxiety?
You know, it's a really good question. And we went round and round trying to think of a name for the book, and it just kept coming back to high functioning anxiety. So when we think, the easiest way to describe high functioning anxiety is thinking a bit of how we visualize a swan. So we see a swan, and above the water, it's gliding. It looks like it's like really graceful. It looks like it's got it all together, but underneath it's sort of paddling. And sometimes that's how we are in life, is underneath we're overthinking, we're catastrophizing, we're overworked, we're burnt out, we're lonely, we're tired. But on the surface, everyone thinks we're fine. Everyone thinks that you've got it together. You're someone who doesn't miss a deadline. You're someone who's at all the events. You're always happy. You're always social. You're always energized. But that's not what's going on underneath. So for me, high functioning anxiety is you're presenting in one way, but underneath there's so much happening that people don't often see because we're masking it. We've learned to mask it. We have learned to almost like put the suppressed outside, but it's still going on, but we just don't show it to the world around us.
So if we think about leaders particularly, and maybe leaders of big organizations, are there some telltale signs that we can watch out for? Because if we're a caring organization and maybe we work alongside them in the C-suite and, you know, we want to make sure that we've got their backs, what are the kind of things that we need to look out for?
I think as leaders, it's really easy to fall into this high functioning anxiety because you want to make sure that you're looking after everyone else. But the question is, are you looking after yourself? Are you in the background? Are you burnt out? Are you lonely? Do you feel disconnected? Where are your boundaries with like self-care? What are you doing for yourself? So if you're someone who's always feeling tired, always feeling exhausted, it's like, hang on, what's this about? Why am I giving so much to others? But when it comes to me, why is it that I'm not able to give to me? Because I'm so busy, busy, busy. And that's the thing with high functioning anxiety is you can be high functioning, but it's fueled from this place of fear. And it stems from like this anxiety. You're constantly go, 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 but you don't have the space for yourself. You're too busy, just focused on everything else. But often that's an avoidance because you don't want to look at yourself. And you don't even realize you're doing this because this has become a pattern in your life. So the signs would be looking out for how exhausted do you feel, but also what do you do for yourself? What are some of the things that you are doing to self-care where it's not including looking after everyone else and making sure you're there for everyone else? Because what about you in that?
It sounds like then it's quite difficult for other people to spot this. So if we're thinking about ourselves, where does self-awareness fit into that? How do I tap into self-awareness to help me understand myself and whether I am high functioning anxiety?
That's a really powerful question because often people that have high functioning anxiety, they aren't self-aware of their patterns. They're stuck in this space of go, 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 where they're so busy for everyone else, doing things for everyone else because that's what they've learned to do. This is where even in the book, I go back into the inner child, go back into our core beliefs. So where is it that I learn this belief of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I'm not deserving? And where is it that I learned that I need to make sure that other people get more from me than I can give to myself? So you learn that your needs don't matter and you learn to give to everyone else. That would have become now a pattern that you continue with, but you're not conscious of that. And when we think of consciousness and we think of self-awareness, is you may not have given yourself the space and the time to really become aware of these thoughts that you're having, your behaviors, your feelings that you're having, because you've disconnected from all of this, because it's always been about everyone else. So you're living outside in rather than inside out. And when you start developing that self-awareness of, hang on, what about me here? I'm feeling exhausted. So these are the things that you start to notice is, I'm noticing these things about me. I'm seeing these things about me. But when you then start to give yourself space to start to explore this, that's where you can go, like, dive deeper into, hang on, what's really going on here? And you start to develop that self-awareness in understanding what are some of the thoughts that you're having, what are some of the behaviors that you're presenting with, but also what are the feelings that are coming up? Because often we're disconnected from it. We're not allowing ourselves to really delve deep into that. We're not giving ourselves the space or the moments of pause to really reflect within. And that's where, when you start down this sort of like journey of self-discovery and self-inquiry, you start developing more of this awareness.
So there feels like there's an element of missing out on self-care there. I really like the way you described your living outside in. And I've heard people talk about that when they talk about self-care.
Yeah. So what you're doing is, you have learned to attune to people around you and their emotions and their reactions. And you need to make sense, or your nervous system is connected to that. So if someone around you is not okay, or is feeling sad, or is feeling upset, you quickly need to regulate your own emotions. You need to fix that for them. That's what you've learned to do. But that goes back into your attachments, goes back into you making sense of, maybe mom was inconsistent, dad was inconsistent. And it's not about blaming your parents, but it's about understanding, where did you learn to regulate your emotions in the way that you did? So maybe something along the way has been like, actually, mom and dad weren't able to hold your emotions, but you learned to regulate your emotions through where they're at. But that pattern then continues. But even in leadership, I see it happen with so many different high achieving leaders who are leading such an amazing company, but where is their self-care? They've learned to keep giving and giving and giving and giving, but they don't know how to give to themselves. And that's the really sad thing, is they've never learned that they are enough, they're deserving, they are entitled to be able to look after themselves. They're just so busy giving and making sure that everyone else around them is okay, but they don't know how to pause and just be with themselves without, or if someone else is upset, it's like, how do I just sit with that rather than I need to fix it? Because that's more about you than it is about the other person.
Two things you said there that I really would like to explore. The first is, how do you define self-awareness? And then the other part is the part that childhood
Mm.
plays in our adulthood. And I ask that on the basis that for the last 18, 20 years, I've been working in the early years space. So
Yeah.
I'm a director of a children's charity, and our area of interest is preschool children. And in those 18 years, I've learned a lot about brain development and how parents have an impact on that brain development. So let me go back firstly to that first question of, how do you define self-awareness?
Self-awareness is like the foundation. So self-awareness is a foundation of everything that's going on for you. And it's about understanding, what are your thoughts, what are your feelings, and what are your behaviors. So if you start to become attuned, so say, for example, I am speaking to one of my colleagues, and when they're talking to me, they might be dismissive, or they might just be on their laptop, and I'm trying to have a conversation. So now my feeling might be, I might be feeling a little bit rejected. I might be feeling a little bit like, oh, have I done something wrong? And these are the thoughts then that start to come in. Have I done something wrong? Did I upset them? So now I'm starting to think, catastrophize. So I'm becoming self-aware, is you becoming aware of, what am I feeling when this person isn't looking at me, or they're busy typing and I'm trying to talk to them? What am I thinking, and what's the narrative that I have? Why has my narrative gone to this? Because that comes from a belief system as well. So if you've got a belief system where, once upon a time, feeds into your question you asked about earlier, if you felt abandoned as a child, if you felt rejected as a child, this will be playing out in the narrative, and the belief that you have is, I'm not good enough. If you don't feel good enough and someone's busy typing away and they're not looking at you, that's going to fuel that same belief system. So what are you going to then do as a behavior? Are you then going to overcompensate? Are you then going to be like, oh, let me just not give this person any more work because they clearly are very busy? So we then create that narrative, and we make a choice in that space because of what might be going on. Developing self-awareness is understanding, hang on, this person isn't, it feels like they're being dismissive, but that's my view of them, where they're at right now. They might have a million and one other things going on, but my narrative is taking me into this space. So that's what self-awareness is about, is becoming aware and attuned to what's happening within your mind, body, energy when you're around certain people. And there might be certain triggers that might be coming up, or certain emotions that might be coming up, from emotional reactions rather, that might be coming up when you're around certain people. And when you become aware of this rather than being reactional, it's learning to be responsive. That's what I feel self-awareness is you becoming more aware of your surroundings and the world around you whilst you're navigating and experiencing the world around you.
And that's a constant journey, isn't it? Because that changes all of the time, whether we're talking about the people or the environment, we're constantly in and out of those different spaces and places.
Definitely. Like, we're always learning. There's so many different things that we're learning in everyday life, and everyday experiences just keeps teaching us more and more about things that are going on within us. So you might be speaking to a friend that you haven't seen. You could be in a coffee shop and speaking to a complete stranger and learn something about yourself in that space. We have so many shadow parts of us, which I talk about a lot in the book, is how do we keep integrating these shadow parts into our consciousness? So we're like, oh, actually, this is what's coming up for me in this. This is what's happening for me here. And that becomes more and more part of your self-awareness, and then how you continue to navigate life day to day.
I really like that. We often talk about blind spots, but shadow parts,
Yeah.
it feels more expansive than actually a blind spot, because we have these shadow parts, as you say, and as you move in different directions, the shadows change shape as well. So
Oh, I
I
love
really
that
like that.
creative way of thinking about it, because it's true, isn't it? Like, light hits us in different ways, and then we have different shadows that keep popping up, and it's like, oh, what is this? Rather than running away from it or ignoring it, it's like, no, this shadow's going to keep coming up unless I do something with this or try and make sense of it. Otherwise, it's just going to keep coming up, coming up, coming up. So yeah, that's a beautiful way of being creative with it.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us about your thoughts of our childhood and how our development and our brain development and our parenting and our environment, how all of that impacts, particularly around anxiety.
I think it's really interesting. And I use the word interesting because people that tend to be high functioning and come from a place of anxiety, they're like, yeah, but I had a really good childhood. Everything was fine. And it's almost like there's so many protective layers in people not wanting to blame. And I always say to people, we're not here to blame. We're not here to blame your parents. We're not here to say that because of your parents and the way that they've treated you, because every parent has going through their journey. They're doing the best that they can in the time that they have and the self-awareness that they have. But it's also understanding that when you start to become more aware of like your childhood and understanding the patterns, understanding your attachments, your early attachments, it's crucial in helping you to understand your adult connections and your adult attachments. So say, for example, and I see this a lot, is if children grow up in an environment where parents might be inconsistent, or parents might not be sharing certain things with children, and children know that things are going on, children then can develop this anxiety. And what they learn to do is people please, or they might learn to be a perfectionist. And something I've experienced, I know that growing up for me, I was a people pleaser, I was a perfectionist. So even in my own experience, I know that there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to upset anyone, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And I was hyper vigilant to people around me to try and understand that I don't ever want to upset anyone or disappoint anyone, because I didn't know how to regulate the disappointment. I didn't know how to regulate the guilt, the shame, because these were big emotions that, being second generation and individual, where my parents were first generation, survival mode was all about, right, how do we make a better life here? But they weren't about emotional connection. They weren't about let's regulate emotions. Whereas second generation here, we weren't then taught to regulate these big emotions. So often you find in second generation individuals, there's people pleasing, there's perfectionist traits, because you're trying to make sense of things that there's no nurturing, there's no connection. So you may be nurtured in other ways, but there's certain, when it comes to emotions, you're not regulating these emotions. So you then end up in coping behaviors that don't often serve you. It's again, living outside in, focused on everyone else. And it's something I share in my book about how we're so focused on everyone else around us. We become hyper vigilant. We notice like the smallest changes in people. And that can come from growing up in an environment where you don't want to upset people, you don't want to disappoint people. And then you don't want to feel this rejection, this abandonment. So you'll do anything in order to feel safe, to make sure that you're doing all the good things that you should be doing because you're a good child. So it's a tick box exercises that are going on in your mind. You don't even realize you're doing it because you're not aware. You don't have the tools to be able to make sense of what's going on for you, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, why you're behaving in the way that you are.
I'm interested that you're talking a lot about fitting in and as much about fitting in into societies, into families.
Yeah,
When we step into an organization, we are often trying to fit in there as well. If
definitely.
we are different in any way, if we are neurodiverse, how do we tap into our self-awareness to both understand and to manage that kind of anxiety that comes with that?
Yeah, I think there's a massive fear of judgment because being neurodiverse myself, I know I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 20s, and when I did, I was like, do I tell the workplace? Do I not? Like, and there is a massive anxiety because you feel people are going to judge you, but that also comes from shame. Shame of you feeling like I'm not going to have this sense of belonging. People aren't going to accept me in this space, or people are going to think I'm difficult. People are going to think that I'm a burden. So you have these deeper beliefs that are going on, and even now when I work with people who are neurodiverse, similar things. It's like, I don't want to tell the workplace because there's a promotion coming up. I might not get this promotion. So we have these inner beliefs of, and they're like, it's almost like it's prejudgments of you not getting to a space that you want to get to. So if you're thinking about getting to this promotion, you're already preconceiving that this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be rejected, I'm going to be abandoned. But that comes from your previous experiences as well. And it's how do you really trust yourself? And that's again something I talk about in the book is how do you trust yourself? How do you trust your intuition? How do you really tune into, hang on, I can hold space for me here. So if I'm noticing that there's someone here that might be judging me or someone's bringing things up, how in a workplace can I bring that up to someone's attention and just say, hey, look, I know I've got these things that are going on. No one's perfect, but how is it that I'm trying to better myself in the workplace to be the best leader that I can be? What tools may I need? What support may I need as well? Because people shy away from getting the right support because they're afraid of people seeing them as not being capable, not being a good leader because they need support. But don't we all need support? Don't we all need to better ourselves in some shape or form? And don't we want to put up our hands and say, actually, this is what I'm looking for. This is the support I might be needing.
So when you're supporting people, working with people, what kind of things are you talking about or exercises that you're doing maybe to help people develop their self-awareness for themselves to start with?
Yeah.
I'm also interested about how do you do that for other people?
I think that's something as a leader is being authentic. And being authentic doesn't mean that you go out and you share everything that's going on for you. Because as a leader as well, you want to make sure, yes, you're being authentic. But there's the image that comes to mind is when you're in your warrior position in yoga. And when you're in your warrior position, you have your arm out, you've got your focus, but you've also got this barrier, this boundary that's there, but your heart space is open. So although your heart space is open, you've still got that boundary in place. You're still making sense of, I'm not going to wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm not going to wear my heart here. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to learn to put in these boundaries. So when, as a leader, you don't want to be sharing everything with everyone around you and your employees as well as other people in leadership, because you don't know how other people are going to react, but you want to become more in tune with, hang on, what's going on for me? What's important for me to share in the workplace? What do I feel like I don't need to be sharing? Because what we don't want to do is just start sharing everything. But there's also other people that may not have self-awareness, that may not emotionally regulate in a certain way that is going to be helpful for us. So we also need to learn the boundary and make sense of what's going on for me, but really tuning in and trusting with how then can I communicate with others based on the needs that I need. So for me, it starts from within, you looking at what are your needs, what are some of the things that you might be needing, but also not getting caught up with these are the people that are going to give me everything to give me or to provide me with what I need. It's like, no, we can also give ourselves that by understanding what are these needs? What's the intention of me wanting people to know certain things about me? Because you want to protect yourself as well within the workplace.
It feels like both as individuals, we have to step up to the mark,
Yeah.
but actually the organizations have to meet us at that point as well. So it's a two-way street. So
Yeah.
if you're talking about or talking with leaders who have people within their organizations that they may be people with high functioning anxiety, how do you raise that leaders awareness and what do they do to support those individuals?
So often leaders will say, I don't want to get rid of it. I don't want to get rid of my high functioning anxiety because how else am I going to function? And I think this is where we want to raise awareness in that actually, no, there's burnout, there's real physical impact of this. And often people will start going or looking within once they hit that burnout. So because their coping strategies of go, 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 they hit that point, they hit that brick wall, and they're not able to get back up and use them strategies in the same way. And that's when they're willing to want to look within. But we want to try and get people to be preventative with this and start to become more aware. And that's one of my missions is becoming more aware of this high functioning. Like you're not going to get rid of your high functioning side if you get rid of or learn to manage the anxiety. And there's a really beautiful film that's a cartoon that's recently come out, Inside Out 2, and it shows anxiety. I don't know if you've watched it.
Not yet. It's definitely on my
No,
list.
it's such a beautiful cartoon. Like it just shows you how anxiety can show up, but it also shows you how when you're connected with all your other parts of you, how working together and how really supporting yourself, it manages your anxiety rather than your anxiety just blocking out everything. You're being very reactive because you're catastrophizing about something that may not have happened because you're trying to keep yourself safe. It's like, no, actually, I don't need to do that. What I need to do is learn to understand what is this thing, and this is where self-awareness is important. What's creating the anxiety within me? Why do I feel certain things when I'm anxious? And what's going on? So that again is part of your shadow self that we want to learn to integrate into yourself. So when we work with leaders, often leaders don't even know about high functioning anxiety. The amount of talks that I've done in different corporates, and they're like, this exists. This is something that I didn't even realize existed, or I just thought it was something that I go through. I didn't realize other people go through this because it's that imposter within you, is you presenting as yeah, I'm fine, but actually underneath there's this other part of you and you ignore it, but you think that you're the only one that's going through this, but you're not. Like I think there were stats that were done that how many people struggle with imposter syndrome. It's over 85% of people. Don't quote me on that, but I remember reading something about 85% of people the struggle with imposter syndrome, but no one will ever share that this is what's going on for them because we need to keep up this appearance. We need to keep showing that I'm okay, I've got it together. Look, I'm here, I'm here. But as a leader, actually, no, we want to be relatable. We want to be real. We want to be authentic with what's going on for us. And if we're struggling and if we're seeing our staff struggling, how do we then look after them? How do we then teach them to look after themselves? But also, yeah, step in and be as functioning as you can in the workplace. But even like little moments of self-care can go a long way in just keeping your mental health and keeping you grounded every day.
It's interesting as you talk that the number of conversations that I have with different podcast guests, and there are so many connections between what we talk about. So high functioning anxiety, overwhelm, imposter syndrome. I've spoken to podcast guests, so Adrian Ashton and Aoife O'Brien, who are both talking about imposter syndrome, as well as Melanie Wilkie. So 3 guests already talking about that, and they are all connected to self-awareness, connected to high functioning anxiety. And it feels like there might be a continuum there
Yeah.
of, you moved from imposter syndrome and then you become more anxious, but then you may be less anxious in a particular day. So how do we manage this? How do we move so that we feel less anxious in a particular situation? How do we manage that on a day-to-day, on an hour by hour, maybe?
So in my book, it's a 5-step guide, and in the 5th chapter, what I've done is wrote down 12 powers. And the powers are about how do we really empower ourselves? How do we really show up? So things like really setting boundaries with ourselves. But to do that, we need to learn more about ourselves. We need to become more aware and we need to understand what our needs are. And if we've never done that, it's like speaking a very different language and it can feel very intense initially. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes for you. So when we're talking about how do we show up, we need to learn what do we give ourselves. So if you're, for example, just eating for the sake of eating, we need to learn, hang on, when do I feel hungry? When do I feel thirsty? And when I do, what am I giving myself? Am I just filling myself with anything, or am I being really consciously aware of and intentional with what I'm doing for myself? Because if we're just like, okay, I'm noticing I'm hungry, just go, but we're very unconscious about it, that's not helping you. So how do you really help yourself? How do you really start to show up for yourself and become more aware of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, your belief systems of how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see the world? Where do you feel like you are in that? It's everyday life. we're taught, we're given opportunities to go deep within, to start understanding more and more and more about ourselves. But we also need to invest that time. And when we are high functioning anxiety, we don't know how to, because we're so busy with go, go, go. We don't know how to just stop and pause. But that pause could just be you having a cup of tea without a phone, without emails, without you doing a million one other things at the same time. Is just being present with how am I feeling from within, and just starting that like routine or ritual where you're stopping during the day, giving yourself pause moments and really tuning like, what am I feeling here? Or if you're around certain people in the workplace and you're like, okay, that person, what's gone on for me when they've just done that? Or what's happening here? Or what am I noticing here? So you're learning to become more grounded in the space around you, more intentional with, hang on, what's actually happening here? Instead of like, okay, I need to go to the next thing, because that's an avoidance of what's really going on underneath. You're really deep learning to deep dive and go deeper within yourself.
So tell us a bit more about your book. What else might readers find in your book?
I've intentionally split the book into two sections. So the first section is all about unlearning. We go through unlearning first because we have to go back to the beginning, understand where has it all come from? Why is it that I think in this way? So I go into the inner child, I talk about the beliefs that we have developed over time, and then we move more into the learning space. And the learning space is, how now do I move forward with a new language that I'm trying to learn, a new language that I'm like, okay, how do I deal with this? It's like, no, there is a way, and there is another way, a way that you just learn to develop this inner peace. You develop this space where you can just be without the do. It's like, no, I can just be and I'm okay with this, because you've learned to regulate your emotions. So you're not just sitting with guilt and shame and thinking, how do I get rid of this? It's like, no, I can sit with this. I'm learning to understand it. And I can then integrate that back into my life to make sense of what's going on, to help me keep growing and to develop personally and professionally.
Where is the best place for people to get hold of your book?
If you Google high functioning anxiety book, it'll come up with Amazon, Waterstones. It's available in a majority of the bookstores out there. So just type in high functioning anxiety book and it'll come up with your
Brilliant. And
nearest
we'll
bookstore.
make sure that there is a link in the show notes too, so that our watchers and our listeners can get a copy. So, what are your thoughts on the future? Because I'm quite interested in, as we move towards ultra digitalism, that we're going to have this need for hyperhumanism, and I've got this hunch that we're going to need to balance things out, and we can't become so ultra digital that actually we can't balance hyperhumanism. What do all of those things mean for people who have high functioning anxiety? How do they shift into this very digital focused world? And how do they manage working from home, hybrid working, virtual communication? How does all of that fit?
With high functioning anxiety, the one thing that I put into the book is about sensitivity, and about how, as we are high functioning, we are very sensitive. We pick up on things, we notice things in people, we can read like different things that are going on, and often we then personalize it. And when we're sitting at home and we're hybrid working, we need to be very mindful of that, because if we get an email, if we are communicating through text, if we are communicating via Slack, we need to be mindful of, hang on, when I'm reading something, what's going on for me? What am I noticing? And what's coming up for me? So again, giving yourself that space rather than thinking, oh God, I've upset this person. So just being more conscious of the narrative. But I think it's also about having boundaries, because yes, you want to be around people. So when you are going into the office, you're connecting with people, you're getting an idea of how people are. So when you are messaging online, you're connecting, it's a very different space. But I think also anxiety is going to evolve as well in how we're connected with different people. So when you are working from home and then you're going into the office, you will naturally start to feel a little bit more anxious, because you're like, oh God, I need to be around people, and what are they going to be thinking about me? So we're going to have a different type of anxiety that's going to evolve. And I think it's about becoming more aware of, just again, your anxieties, your triggers, your feelings. And if you develop this self-awareness, you can then manage the anxiety. It's not saying that you can't manage it. It's about, how do you then manage this change in anxiety that's presenting, because the world is changing around us and we are more online than we've ever been before. How do you then manage that? And also having boundaries. Boundaries are really important. Not always feeling that you need to be on social media or that you're connecting with colleagues constantly through email. Like, can we not book in a video call? Can we not book in a call where we can talk to one another on the phone rather than it just being through certain mediums? But I think, again, different generations are going to, some generations are going to be like, no, 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 no. I prefer this and I don't want to talk to anyone. And that can create an anxiety. But again, we want to understand the different levels of communication and how that's changing over time and making sense of, okay, if someone is in a generation where they like to talk to people, and then we've got someone in generation where they don't want to talk to someone and they just want to text. How are we then, as an organization, teaching people how we want to communicate, and how do we support both individuals? Because from both ends, there's going to be deeper feelings of loneliness, disconnection, burnout in their own right. So it's about, how do we manage that? How do we look after that? And it comes back down to the individual. How do we as an individual notice what's going on for us, but also communicate that to the organization to let them know so our needs are met?
It does definitely feel like the conversation of the future working world is very much centered around individualization, because I
Yeah.
think we've tried to manage teams and homogenous groups, but actually it's going to be more about the individual. So if I am a leader and I'm concerned about a very effective member of staff, but I'm worried about what they're worrying about, what kind of conversations should I be having with them?
I think just starting a conversation. Hi, how are you? Rather than thinking, because your narrative is running off somewhere, you might
Mm.
be noticing something in someone, but let's just be real about it and just say, like, hey, look, start a conversation, notice what's going on. And if you feel like they're not really available, you can just ask, like, look, is everything okay? I've noticed over the last few weeks that you haven't been yourself, and I'm just wondering, is everything okay? So what you're doing is you're understanding, hang on, I'm feeling that this person in front of me isn't okay. But you're also being real about it. You're saying, I've noticed this, but you're starting a conversation where it's not intrusive, like, what's wrong with you? Tell me what's wrong with you. It's like, no, I'm just being curious. Like, are you okay? And if they say yes, we also need to then be okay, be okay as a leader to be like, okay, I need to respect that. But you might also then come back and want to check in like the next day or give it a few days and then just check in again and say, hey, look, I've noticed this. Is everything okay? And also, you can also share what you're noticing. So are you noticing they're a little bit quieter? Are you noticing that their productivity at work is different? Are you noticing that they're not as focused as they usually are? Sharing that can really help the other person then to feel seen, to feel heard. And they may also be defensive, but then that as a leader is that you building that trust, you building that space of empathy. And that's why I say don't go in there and say, what's wrong with you? Because I'm noticing. It's like, no, let's just start a conversation, build that trust up, let the person know that, like, yeah, you're interested in what's going on. And then you're sharing, hey, is everything all right? And just starting a conversation there. And then being able to offer the individual some support of some kind if they do start sharing things for like what might be going on for them.
I think that's really good advice, because I think we're very good at saying, "How are you?" And if somebody gives you an answer, whether it's "I'm fine" or "I'm not fine," we don't know what to say next.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
think that idea of sharing, "Are you okay? I've noticed you've been quieter recently," it opens a door to a different kind of
yeah.
conversation that if you're really not sure about that, or maybe you're new to managing people, or maybe new to this individual, then that's a really helpful way of saying, this
Mhm.
isn't just a superficial question. This is a question that's been thought through, and there's care behind this.
Definitely. And I think also just being mindful of the people around you as well, because if you're going in and you're in a shared office and
Mm.
you're asking the person, are you okay? I've noticed like who else is listening and how does that person then feel? So you might want to say, hey, look, should we go and grab a tea? I'm just going to make a tea. Should we go and grab one? Or, hey, I'm just going to go for a walk. Did you want to go for a quick walk? Or it'd be great to have a check-in just to see how you're doing. Should we have a check-in? So again, there's a space, there's a time rather than trying to like catch them out when they're sort of like least expecting it. So you might say, hey, you're right. How are things? Oh, it'd be great to have a check-in. It's been a while. When are you next available? And then having that check-in, and then you've got that private space to really just deep dive rather than the other person just feeling like they're unsure.
Yes, environment as well as the words you use to ask those questions are particularly important. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with leaders out there, people managers out there, or maybe somebody who thinks that maybe some of the worries they have might be high functioning anxiety?
I think it's really just tuning in, trusting yourself. And I use the word I think because I'm just like, okay, what is it that might be you're noticing as individuals? We're all noticing and feeling different things. Really trust things that you're feeling, things that are coming up for you, because we all notice different things. We are all here in our unique abilities. And if you're noticing something that's going on, don't just ignore it. Don't just and push it to one side. Tune in with it. And it might not be that you're going to be doing something with it, but you're just starting to listen in and tune in to hang on, what's going on here? You're connecting mind, body, energy together to try and make sense of, I'm noticing this. So give yourself moments of pause, but really start tuning in to like what's going on within you to make sense of it, giving yourself the space. And you might not be able to make sense of it, but that's part of your learning and part of your growth. So sit with it. It's a new language. Trust yourself, be patient. That's what I would share with someone is start journaling, start writing things down, start talking to people that you feel like you can trust, doing some more research into it, entering a therapy space, and you're starting to develop more tools and understanding of yourself.
Yes, start simple. And that's the same for self-awareness. I think in terms of our conversation for the purpose of raising awareness of awareness, I think we've had a really good conversation, and I hope that it's really got some people out there thinking about themselves and how they can care for themselves better and maybe care for other people in their spaces better. So for today, Dr. Lalitaa, thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on today's show where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. If you want to make sure that you keep in touch with what's going on in the world of self-aware leadership, head over to my website and sign up to my newsletter. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.